The question of whether nightlife was better during medieval time compared to now would have a different answer for each individual. If you love electronic dance music and shiny lights, we'd have to say you'd be pretty bored with the simplicities of pub life. There are romantic ideas of how it was during medieval times from popular movies. Jolly dancing, a tavern with a large stone fireplace, plenty of men clanking big glasses, and someone playing the fiddle with glee. It was a more intimate experience than what we have today, but it may not have been your thing either. Medieval monasteries. Today, churches don't offer alcohol and accommodation in the way they did back then. Visitors could come to visit monasteries, which benefited the monks in many ways. It allowed them to keep in contact with the outside world and find out what was going on. If wealthy landowners came to stay, they would potentially donate some land or other essentials to the monastery. In return, the monastery would offer lodging and a place to stay. In the 13th century, monasteries started to develop taverns with first-class hospitality. They became very popular, and it got to the point where inns began to follow suit. Seeing the popularity of this business, women were forbidden from the monasteries as well, so it was limited to the guests who could stay. Hard to believe that it was a religious sect that prompted the big drinking population that was later seen. The entertainment. Entertainment was a big part of the nightlife in medieval times. Nowadays, you usually get music in the background. You might go listen to live music or just listen to satellite radio. In medieval times, traveling entertainment would include jugglers, acrobats, and shows with trained exotic animals. There were puppet shows and traveling circus events as well. People would often play games like chess and backgammon, which may result in all-out brawls if cheating was suspected. Music was a huge part of entertainment as well. The rondo was particularly prevalent during the Middle Ages. This was a French poetry style of music that would include quintets. Parties. The parties we know of today, whether it's a birthday party or a New Year's party, wouldn't be available to everyone. While today you might exclude an annoying friend, likely most of us would never get to experience a party. It was only nobles and royals that got to enjoy a party. What would be involved? There would be food and alcohol along with music and dancing. These parties were more about being seen, networking to get higher rank, and catching up on current events or gossip. You could compare it to the Academy Awards or the Emmys, where only the elite were invited. Taverns. The pub of today is derived from the concept of public houses, which were derived from the original place of drinking, taverns. Today, pubs are somewhat social, but it's not really the same as it once was. You might have a local pub you hang out at, so you have somewhat of a taste of the old way of drinking and socializing. The nightlife we think about during the medieval times is usually the tavern life where ale and bread were consumed. Many people traveled by horse, which would only be able to get in around 10 kilometers per day. The horses would tire, and so in each town a man could drop his horse off at the inn for a new horse. The inn would often be attached to a tavern, so you get a nice mix of new people traveling through town. These alehouses were an important part of history. Tavern owners took great pride in their ales, which were usually brewed by the wives. Along with the drinking was a merry time of song, dance, and stories. There wasn't a lot of time for recreation during the medieval times, but when one had time, a tavern is where you could find people with money to enjoy this luxury. Taverns weren't always in an official building with a tavern keeper though. Often you'd just be visiting a neighbor who had brewed their own ale. The neighbor would post a sign on their door, letting everyone know there was a fresh brew of beer available. Gambling would often be included, which could easily lead to fights. Just like today, there were alcohol-related incidents and accidents. Nightlife curfews. Taverns in medieval times didn't stay open late. There were strict curfews in place in cities and larger towns. There were regulations about carrying weapons to minimize any problems if people got into a drunken argument. There was a curfew bell that would ring around dusk, which gave people time to get home and clear the streets. If you were out after dark, you'd have to have a light and a reason to be out. Laws were enforced heavily, and all-night parties would be uncommon, so you'd want to be back at home or back in the inn. Fun factor: the medieval times had a very social nightlife. Everyone would meet in the middle at a neighbor's home or tavern, which was great. There were prostitutes, if that's the kind of fun you were after, live music, and much entertainment. It was a fun time to be had, but there were also a lot of hazards. With so many people coming in and out of town, it was hard to know who to trust. There was a lot of poverty, which could lead to stealing. We know the medieval times were quite barbaric, and going out for the night could put you into predicaments that we wouldn't be used to. This is why there were rules and regulations, which were much more strict. When there was a war or kings were paranoid, the regulations were repressive. People were spying on one another, and if you were a shady person, the innkeepers would report you. You might liken it to the restrictions faced during the pandemic. Selection of drinks. Let's face it, we're spoiled for choice in this day and age. You wouldn't be seeing a Negroni or whiskey sour on the menu. In fact, there wouldn't be a menu at all. The waitress would just shout out what was available. There were no hard liquors, so if you love a good cocktail, you'd be out of luck. The beverages would be limited to wine, beer, cider, or mead. The cheapest drinks for the poorest would be limited to light ale and wine. Alcoholic content was low, ranging from 1.5 to 4%. Alcohol was available depending on where you lived as well. Wine-producing areas of Europe made it possible for people to enjoy wine. In Germanic countries, there was beer that offered a barley flavor due to hops. In the British Isles, there was ale, which was made with malted barley that didn't have hops. For flavor, they may have added herbs as well. Violence and bad behavior. There were many accounts of people being killed during drunken brawls. The tavern dwellers often disturbed the peace. As with any era, drinking too much would often bring the worst out in people, and violence would ensue. Thank you for watching today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more amazing content.